Creating a site header with a logo, navigation block and a scroll effect, like adding a color background, is a reasonably common task in web design. However, when you combine this with WordPress and the site editor, things start to get a little bit tricky because you have to adhere to the core principles, like the block editor, the site editor, theme.json and various other things. So I'm going to show you how we can make this sticky header with this animated slide effect in both the front end and the back end. So let's dive in. So I need to go and build a header and add some content to a site. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll come back and explain exactly what I've done. So I've roughly built this site here, and you'll notice that I've implemented a sticky header. Now the only way to achieve the sticky header is by selecting a parent block, and under the settings for that block, set the positioning to sticky. And that's how I've managed to create this sticky navigation. You'll also notice that I've got a group inside the header, and I've purposely given this an anchor of navigation group. And this is because we can then use this as an ID to target to make changes on the scroll event that we'll come on to. And the other thing I've done, which is important to note, is the row beneath that, I've actually set that to a minimum height of 120 pixels. And the reason I've done that is because anything below that I can then offset. For instance, the next element is a group block with a cover, and that is actually set to a negative margin of 120 pixels. And that means that it will start right at the top of where the navigation starts. And to illustrate that in action, if I just go to my group where my navigation is, I can take off the color background and clear that. As you can see, we've got a navigation that is sticky, but it sits over the top of our cover block, which is a nice effect, and that's kind of what I want to happen. But as I scroll, I want that then to change color, because I don't want it to disappear when we get to a page or an element that's white. So how do we achieve that? Well, that's the reason why I've given this group an ID of navigation group. Now the issue here is that if we remove that group at any point and rebuild it, that group ID would potentially disappear. So any JavaScript that we've hard coded or any logic we've created would disappear. So how do we hard code this? Well, the best way to do this is probably to build a custom block that has its own ID, and then you bunch everything in that for your navigation and your logo. However, why do we need to build a custom block when we can actually utilize the blocks that we have in the site editor? Well, what we can do is we can create a variation. So it will be a group, but we'll call it group navigation. And then we can hard code that ID into that group variation. So let's go ahead and do that next. So in my theme, I've got a basic theme set up here, and this is the theme that I'm actually using for this demonstration. So in my theme, I need to create a functions.php file. So the first thing I'm going to do is to open up this with PHP, and I'm going to create a function, and this is going to be, I don't know, theme callback function. We don't need any parameters, and we're going to enqueue a script. So I need to enqueue script, and conveniently this has given me all the handles I need. So if I just clean this up a little bit, don't need that. So the first thing I need to do is to create a handle. So I'm just going to call this, I don't know, theme callback block variation. So this is just a unique handle that I need. And then I need to point my function or the enqueue script to the source of my JavaScript file. So to do that, I'm just going to call the template URI, and that doesn't take any parameters, but we need to append the root directory. So I'm going to add the script to a assets folder, and within that, I'm going to call it js/block variations.js. Okay, so then I need to add my dependencies. Now, in order for this to work with the block editor, we need to add some dependencies, and they will be the WP blocks script and also the WP DOM ready script. Now these will just say that when this script loads, we're also going to load these two scripts as well, which come from the block editor or Gutenberg. And the next thing we need to do is to just add in a version number. So this is just going to be, we're going to get the theme version, which there is a function for, and we can provide that with a method. And we're just going to say get the version. There we go. So by default, it is placed in the footer, so I don't need to add that. And then I'm just going to close that off. So then I need to add this to a hook. So I'm going to add this to the action hook that is going to load in the back end. So, and that hook is called enqueue block editor assets. And this then just needs to be my callback function, which is this function here. So basically what happens is when this hook fires, it's going to load this, enqueue this script. So the next thing I need to do is to actually create that script. So I'm just going to copy that there. I'm going to go to my folder. I'm going to create a new folder called assets. And then within that folder, I need to create another folder called JS. And then within that, I can then create my file, which is going to be my block variations. So in the block variations, in order to surface a register a block variation, we need to call the global WP blocks, and then we need to register block variations, or variation rather. And then this is going to just take effectively a reference, a JSON reference. So we can just call that by, first of all, locating the variation that we want to sort of create a variation of, and that's going to be the core group. And then after that, we just need to add some parameters. And these are the parameters that we can basically change. So we need to give it a name, and the name is going to be, this is kind of like standard JSON effectively. We're going to call this group navigation. And then we need a title. Doesn't need to be a script, a string. And we'll call this group navigation. And that will be what we'll see in the back end. And then we're just going to call a different icon, and this is going to differentiate. Now, if I just leave this as it is, and we go to the front end, or the back end rather, and hopefully everything will load. So I just save that file, and probably what's worth doing, what I like to do is just to alert just so that I know that the script is actually loading. So if we then go to the back end, which is here, and then we refresh the page. Actually, I'll just save that, make sure I've got that saved as a template. So if we refresh the page, I'm going to leave that, that's fine. Yeah. So if you notice there, this alert is happening, therefore our script must be loading, which is good. That's exactly what we want. So now if I go to the blocks, if I insert a block above this group, and I should be able to technically look for group navigation, and that is my variation. So this block now is coming from my variations, and now I can change the settings for this particular group variation block. And as you'll see, it's difficult to differentiate because if I just remove that for the moment, I'll just place that again. What you'll notice is that the group navigation looks exactly the same. The icon is the same as a group block. So what I want to do is actually change that icon so that I know that it's a very different block, and it's not going to get confused with the other group blocks. So to do that, we just add in another parameter, which is called icon. And this icon comes from the dash icons. So I'm going to use one of the dash icons, which is called menu alt 2. And now if I go back to the back end and refresh the page, foobar loaded, that's my script loading. I go add before. Now if I put in a group navigation, you'll see that we get a very different icon, which is the icon that comes from the dash icons, which is the navigation alt. So I can now place that. Now, the other thing I want to do here is to make sure that we change some parameters. So one of those parameters is going to be in the attributes, and the attributes are going to be defined in my variation. And one of those is going to be that I want to align this full width. And these parameters are basically the parameters that come in from when you actually edit stuff in the site editor, your alignment, if something's bold or full width, etc. So the other thing you can do here is add in a class name, and this comes from the standard kind of JSX. So we can't use class name, we have to use class name with camel case, and that will represent the class name. So if I call this group navigation, and I also want to add the ID, and that is called anchor, and that is what will allow us to target this particular variation. So again, I'm just going to call that group navigation as well. And the layout I want to set as well. So I'm going to add layout, and this I want to be, this has to be an object. And this I want to set as type, which is a parameter, not a, and this will be constrained. We can get rid of that for now. Okay, so this is our basic block setup. Now, if I save that, let me just go to the back end, refresh the page. We'll no longer get a foo bar because I've removed that. And if I add in a block after this, select group navigation, and we get an error. So why is that? Well, the way to debug this is to have a look at our error log. I'm just going to put this in my screen, which is going to be there. So what do we have? Layout type is undefined. Okay, so we go back to the layout type, spelling error. So it needs to be constrained. Type layout, type constrained. I still can't bloody spell it. Okay, so hopefully that will resolve that. So if I add before, we go to group navigation. There we go, beautiful. So, and if we look at the markup, that should be layout type is constrained. So as you can see, these are the kind of like the JSON elements that it picks up, and we've got our align, full, class name, layout. So by creating variations, it's quite powerful in terms of setting things up that can be reused. And because this has got an ID, as we can see here in the next div, we've got class name and we have the ID. We can then target this for in JavaScript, which is absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to go ahead and rebuild the header, and then we're going to jump into the JavaScript. Okay, so I've rebuilt this now with my group variation, which has got my ID, which is this group here, which is called the group navigation block, and it's got my ID. So I've just basically replicated what I built before. However, I'm now using my block variation. So now we can jump into the JavaScript. Now I've gone ahead and built this in my functions PHP file, and this is basically the JavaScript that's going to load in the back end as well as the front end. So I've created a function, theme.js front end, back end enqueue, and I've hooked that to the enqueue block assets hook. Now that will ensure that it loads in the back end as well as the front end. So basically we're just enqueuing a script again. So we're using the WP enqueue script. We're giving it a unique name, which is group navigation script. And again, we're referencing it from our assets.js folder, and it's called group navigation script.js. And we're also adding the dependencies for WP blocks, WP element, and WP site editor, or WP editor. And these are the dependencies that are needed for the site editor, basically. And then I'm using the version number I'm actually getting from the file modified time, and that will be referenced from the group navigation script. And that basically means that any time that this file is changed, it will get the unique reference number. So therefore any caching will be resolved when this script is enqueued. So, and I'm also adding the true flag, and that will basically mean that my script will get loaded in the footer. So I'm hooking it, like I said, to the enqueue block assets, and then I'm just calling my function. So all I need to do now is to make sure that my script is named the same name in my assets folder. And again, I'm going to do the same thing if I save my functions.php. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to, as I did before, I'm going to alert a foo bar, because I just want to make sure that the script is loading in the back end and also in the front end. So if I save that, and then I can pop back to my site, I can refresh my page, and indeed we get a foo bar, which is excellent. Now, for some reason it surfaces twice in the back end, which is fine. You know, we'll just cope with that. I'm not sure why that is, but it is what it is. So, and then we can just look in the front end, that's saved, visit the site, and we should get another foo bar. But in the front end, it only loads once, which is cool. So now we can start adding our JavaScript. Now, I could write this JavaScript. In fact, I probably will adapt the JavaScript, but we do have tools like AI. So why not leverage AI? So I'm going to go over to ChatGPT, and I'm going to ask him to write me some JavaScript code. So JavaScript here. So the prompt is, I don't know, what is it? I want to create, show me JavaScript example of adding, oh, I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to, let's add an element, add a class element to the body on scroll event. Let's see what that comes up with. So it's going to get the document, it's going to add an event listener to the DOM loaded, that makes sense, and it's going to say get the window, add an event listener on the scroll event, yeah, that's fine, and then it's going to get the body, and then it's going to say if the window scroll event is more than 50 pixels, get the body class and add scrolled, else remove. And that is, yeah, that's perfect for what I need. So I'm going to copy that out, and the reason I'd use AI for kind of helping me write stuff because it can kind of think quicker than I can type. So for things like this, it's ideal. But I would say that you do need to know what you're reading and make, to ensure that everything works correctly. Now I know that this is going to work because I just understand JavaScript. I'm no expert, don't get me wrong, but I do understand enough for me to be fairly dangerous with it, I guess. Well, not dangerous, but So I'm going to add this to, I'm going to actually wrap this in a function, I think, and then I'm going to call my function. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So let's wrap this in a function. I'm going to call this handle scroll. Scroll, God, I can't type, for love nor money. I'm just going to take that out of there, wrap it in there, and then I'm going to add my event listener to the end of that. So I can go window, add event listener, and get rid of that. And I want to pull that outside of my function. So I can then call my function. I don't need that, I can just call it like that. So basically my function's written here, so that's going to load. And then on the window event, on the scroll event, it's going to listen for the scroll basically, and then it's going to fire my function on the scroll event. Yeah, so what we can do is we can just get that foo bar, bung it in there, save that. We go to our front end and get rid of that. I just reload the page and there we go. So on the scroll, we now get foo bar, which is what we were expecting, which is cool. So what am I going to do next? What I want to do is check that the body is actually getting the class appended to it. So if I refresh the page again, we inspect the element. So if I'm looking at the body, and then as I scroll, and the class is not getting added. So that isn't going to help us. So why is that not getting added? Okay, so let's go back to our JavaScript. So we're going to get the window, add the event listener. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to load this in the DOM basically. So we're going to call the global WP WordPress kind of gubbin. So this is like all of the WordPress stuff. And it has a method in there called DOM ready. And we can call that, wrap it in a function. And we then need to point that to our wrapper. So I'm going to pull all of that into there. That should work. It's not, because I've not declared body. Right, so I'm going to go document body. That's probably why it wasn't working. So if I save that, so I'm going to attach it to the document. I need to scroll, there you go. Right, so now it's getting the body event and it's adding scrolled so that we know that we've scrolled. And now all I need to do is on that event, when we get to this point where we've scrolled, I can then target my header element. So, which is that one right there. Yeah, group navigation. So now on the body event, we can look for the scrolled. So we can look at the body, we can target the header, WP block template part and group navigation. And then we can start doing some funky stuff to this element here. But before we do that, I need to go back to the back end and I just want to take this color off so that we can make the manipulation in the DOM or in our own CSS files and stuff. So if I save that, just go back to the front end and check that that's done. Yes, it is. Right. Okay. So I'll go back to my site files. So I need to add some CSS and some JavaScript here. So we've got our JavaScript already actually. Now I've got a helper class for this, which is called extend body block assets. And basically you just need to include this class and then it will pick up any JavaScript or CSS file that you place in your theme folder will get picked up and can be enqueued when they're used in your theme. So I'm going to clone this into my theme folder. So all I need to do is to clear that and then do a git clone. Oh, am I in the right folder? Yeah, okay, cool. So all I need to do is to include this class in my theme folder or in my functions.php. So all I need to do is to require once and then reference my template directory, or I can copy that out actually. And it's called extend block assets and it's called extend block assets class.php, or class extend block assets.php. So now that's included, I just need to create a function. And if we actually open this up, I think there's an example function in here. Yeah, so when you instantiate the class, basically you give it the CSS directory and then the JavaScript directory. So that tells the class where to look for these elements. So I'm just going to copy that function into my theme function folder file, and that will, I can add that into the function itself. So this is just going to call my function on the init hook, and it's going to load my assets. So technically all I need to do, if I use the group block in my theme, it will look in my theme folder under the assets, CSS or JS it will look in CSS assets, CSS blocks, and then it will look for the relevant file. If it doesn't find it, then it won't do anything. But so all I need to do is to create these folders in my folder structure. So in assets, I need to create CSS/blocks, and I also need to create a blocks folder in my JavaScript. So technically I don't need to enqueue this JavaScript file anymore. If I save that functions, so technically my class will do everything for me. So I don't need to enqueue this any longer, because my class will actually take on that role effectively. And if you could take a look at the class, basically we set up, register the styles and enqueue the styles, or we register the scripts and we enqueue them or we hook them to the enqueue block assets, and that will load in the front end and the back end. Okay, cool. So technically I don't need this anymore, and I can move the group navigation script into my blocks and call it group. So I'm going to get rid of that, and inevitably something's going to go wrong. I know it is. So if I just call that group and then move it into the blocks folder, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to alert a foo bar just to test that it's not working. So pop to the front end. If I refresh the page, oh my gosh, it works. Okay, so it is working, and yeah, okay, cool, perfect. So that is my JavaScript loading. So then we can do some funky CSS. So all I need to do is to create a file in here called group.css. And what did we target? We're going to target the body, and then it was header, WP, what was it? Look, block template part, and then it was the ID, was it? Yeah, the ID, cool. So the ID, so in this first instance, all I'm going to do is just going to put a background color on just to test to see if it works. So refresh that. Yes, great. Okay, so that's just banging in color. Right, so what do we want to do? We want to actually target the scrolled event on the body, and we also want to make it nice and smooth, so we need to add a transition to our CSS. So on that, I'm going to take that out. I'm going to put a transition. Oh, it's painful watching people type, I'm sure, but it is what it is. So I'm going to put what, 0.5 seconds. So that basically transition is going to make sure that it just happens smoothly over a 0.5 second, half a second effectively. So if I save that, then I'll target the same, just duplicate that. But then if it's on the scrolled event, it will add the class to the body, and then I can then add the color background. And we'll call that black from now. So back to the site, if I refresh the page, it should be transparent, and then when we hit the scrolled, it should go black, and it doesn't. Right-eo, okay. So we've got header, okay, what did I do wrong? We've got body, scrolled, header, WP block template part, next, because it's nested. Okay, so next group navigation. So I'm hoping that will work now, and it doesn't. Why? Okay, so what have we got? Body, scrolled. Did I type scrolled correctly? No, I didn't. Douche. Okay, try it again. Refresh, scroll, there we go. Nice. Okay, so that's doing what we want it to do. Next thing we want to do is actually make it shrink a little bit. So if I get the div that's responsible for, which is actually the nested element, so it's not the group, it's actually the nested element, we can do that by, what can we do? So we have to add the transition to the same element, which is navigation, but it's the next div. So that's just applying the same transition to the group navigation and also the next div. So then that is the color taken care of. And then we want to adjust the minimum height. So I can duplicate that, and I can go next div, I'll set the minimum height. So we set it to 120 pixels. So I'm going to set this now to min height 100 pixels. And because we're adding the transition to that also, it should be nice and smooth. So it'll go from 120 and reduce to 100 on the scroll event. And it doesn't, because it's hard coded. So, or it's inline, not hard coded. Well, it's kind of hard coded inline. So what we have to do is we have to put the important flag on there. So we save that. Now I'm hoping it will work. So we scroll and it goes, nice. Okay, but it's only doing it on the element below. That hasn't got a height. That has a height. Did I put the height on that as well? Perhaps I shouldn't. I don't need that. So I check my group settings. Yeah, I've got a minimum height on the group as well, which I don't need. So I'll take that off. I actually only need it on the row element, which is that one there. Just check it is on there. Yeah, it is. Okay, so I had it on both elements. I didn't need that. So now if we refresh the page, that should shrink nicely. There we go. Perfect. Now I don't want it to be black, so I'm going to pick up one of the colors from my theme. So I can open up my theme JSON. I do have a primary color, so all I need to do is to set this as a var, put it in parentheses, forward hyphen hyphen WP hyphen hyphen preset hyphen hyphen color hyphen hyphen primary. And that will reference the variable from my theme.json file, which is set to this 9E2F1E, which is a lovely color. Okay, so now if we scroll, it should get, yeah, there we go. It's not a great color, but you know, does the job. So that's it. And the key takeaway here is to make it work in the backend. And as you can see, it doesn't currently function in the backend as expected. We're already loading CSS for both the front end and the backend. So you might be wondering, why isn't this working? Well, here's why. Even though we've assigned an anchor to our block, if you inspect the element, you'll notice that WordPress hijacks the ID in the backend, probably for internal reasons. It doesn't actually use our ID or the anchor as its ID. While this works fine for the front end, it doesn't behave the same way in the back end. But if you remember, we added a class name in the block variation, and that is still there. And we can use this to target our block consistently, even in the back end. And this is a great fallback since the class name remains intact across both environments. So we can still fix this in the back end. It just means we need to adapt our CSS. So I'll go ahead and do that in my code editor. And all we need to do is we have kind of two ways to target this. We have the ID for the front end and we have the class for the back end. And that should resolve that issue. So you have to do this on every single instance where that ID has been added, and just replace it with a class, or add it with an additional class. So all I'm doing here is I'm just repeating the same technique, but rather than the ID, I'm targeting the class. So that will fix that. If I pop back to the site editor, refresh the page, and now as we scroll, it does what we were expecting it to do. Now, you could argue that the CSS is getting a little bit unwieldy, and you can absolutely refactor this. Because it's a class, an ID in the front end, you can literally, take all this out. But I specifically wanted to target just the navigation, so you need to just be aware that you can do that. When it comes to the scroll event, you still need the body. But if your class is ever going to be unique, you can do that. But if we do it this way, just remember that wherever that instance of that block is being used, it's always going to apply this. So if you added this block in the content, it's going to apply all of this, which is why I chose to go and choose the header and the template part. But it demonstrates the flexibility of using block variations, and you can absolutely do it how you want to do it. So you don't even have to add an ID. Effectively, you can just use a class, and if it's a unique class, you can absolutely target it. So I hope this has been interesting and it's going to be helpful, but it just shows you how you can get creative with block theme development, and I hope you do use it. Let me know in the comments. And if you do like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, and it really does help the channel, and it helps me get more exposure for other developers. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.